Please understand, my feeling on that is, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? If we could in fact look ourselves in our eye as humanity and say we shall never employ science and technology for those means that may be destructive against others, irrespective of whether or not those individuals are aligned with our ideology and our beliefs. Yes, that would be. The reality of the situation poses itself as something quite differently, however. And the problem we need to face is that certain prohibitions, if not frank proscriptions against using brain science in these potential ways, even defensively, may create an opportunistic window for others to be able to then pursue these approaches more vigilantly and more aggressively. It's a balancing act, folks. I'm not going to necessarily tell you how to resolve it because I don't know, and it becomes difficult. There are certain things we can do on the research side of the house to dial back who does the research, what type of research is done, and what it's used for. But this is a cat that's already out of the bag, and as I hope to demonstrate to you in a moment, this is being conducted on an international scale, and so it may be a little late to start thinking about we're never going to use it like this and what happens if we do or we don't. What types of kind of neuroweapons can we engage and develop? Well, I provide them for you. I don't want to go down into specific granularity as to what each one of them do because I don't want to give you bad dreams, and you're not going to blame me if you wake up in a cold sweat screaming in the middle of the night. But this is what we can do with these things. Again, let's think here about drugs and bugs. If we're looking at drugs, we're looking at what we call in-close pharmaceuticals. These are not weapons of mass destruction. These are weapons of mass disruption. What they can be used to do is create particular yet highly selective effects in individuals so that they can be delivered at very, very low doses, yet deliver a high amplification effect that's called a hormetic potential, to be able to alter cognitions, emotions, and behaviors. How do you do that? Well, you can work on key operatives. In other words, this individual who's sitting before me may be a diplomat. They are now coming to interact with me. They may have a posture that does not necessarily align with mine. Can I alter their cognition? Can I alter their affiliation? Can I alter their emotionality? And in such a way, might I be able to alter their behavior? Yeah, I can. And if, in fact, this individual possesses political or charismatic capability, charm, charisma, leadership potential, to then stand before their people and say, this guy's my best buddy now. They might go, well, I'm following this guy. Or they might think he's stark raving mad and I've created social disruption within his political ranks. I can do that on a variety of levels, from individuals who are head of a small family or group, to the tribal, to the community, to the large-scale population. So we can utilize these things to be able to affect key operators and dynamic individuals who may charismatically, politically, or through other means of power be able to affect groups. It's a ripple effect. It is a ripple effect. Moreover, we can induce a number of neuromicrobiological agents to then incur something called high morbidity. These are not necessarily mortal agents. We can modify the existing palette of bacteria and viruses through the use of gene editing techniques. Very viable. This has been some of my ongoing work with my colleague Diane DeEulis at National Defense University. And what we can also do is recognize that there are existing microbiologicals that can be harnessed to then induce the effects. We can also engage certain chemicals that way. What we want here is a morbidity factor, not necessarily a mortality factor. I want to make people sick. And what I do here is the virus is not necessarily the bug. The virus is what I put over the internet. Let me show you how I can crash a system pretty easily. I affect key individuals here, here, and here. And then I take another community in the back of the room. I affect key individuals there. And then I take another community. I affect key individuals there. And then I do what every good attributional group does. I beat my chest and take credit for it. What I put out over the internet is, this is a virus, a bacteria, an agent that I have infiltrated into your fill in the blank. I say it's a weapon of mass destruction. And what I tell you it's going to do is it's going to produce paranoia, anxiety, and sleeplessness. What I've just done is I've recruited every paranoid hypochondriac to think that they have whatever that is. I've used salient and sentinel cases, and I create essentially a legion of what's known as the worried well. They now flood emergency rooms. They flood their clinicians. The CDC responds back and says, no, 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 there is no such a thing. And I've created a schism of trust between the population and the polis. It's both a short and a long wars effect. Moreover, I can create particular neuromicrobiologicals that may have a much longer duration of action. For example, modified Zika virus. And what I can then do is, as a consequence of that, is I can affect subsequent generations to incur a public health morbidity and mortality effect that then creates an increased economic and perhaps social burden. Long war scenario. If I wanted to do something that's a little bit more proximate, I can utilize nanoparticulate matter. Now, we can utilize nanoscience to create much better drugs, to get them where they got to go in the brain. I can create nanoscience and nanotechnology to be able to escort certain drugs across the proliferant barrier, which is the blood-brain barrier and cerebrospinal fluid barrier. So I get these things where they got to go. But I can also utilize nanoparticulate matter in a very indiscriminate way. The idea here is that I can get something called high CNS aggregation material that is essentially invisible to the naked eye and even to most scanners because it is so small that it selectively goes through most levels of filter porosity. These are then inhaled either through the nasal mucosa or absorbed through the oral mucosa. They have high CNS affinity. They clump in the brain or in the vasculature, and they create essentially what looks like a hemorrhagic diathesis, in other words, a hemorrhage predisposition or a clot predisposition in the brain. What I've done is I've created a stroking agent. And it's very, very difficult to gain attribution to do that. I can use that on a variety of levels, from the individual to the group, highly disruptive. And in fact, this is one of the things that has been entertained and examined to some extent by my colleagues in NATO and to those who are working on the use of neurobiological sciences to create populational disruption. Very, very worried about the potential for these nanoparticulate agents to be CNS aggregating agents to cause neural disruption, either as hemorrhagic and vascular disruptors or as actual neural network disruptors because they interfere with the network properties of various neural nodes and systems within the brain. Then I get to the area of devices. And this, in many ways, is going to be less than definitive. The reason for this is highly evolving and I think is limited only in certain cases by context of imagination. What are the devices? Well, I have them here for you here. We have neurosensory mobilizing agents, and to some extent, some of these have already been used. Things like high-output sensory stimulators that can be administered from unmanned vehicles, drones, insect-borne, or larger-scale, macro-scale vehicles such as tanks, cars, etc. These are sensory mobilizing agents that use high electromagnetic pulse energy that may also utilize high levels of sound, high levels of light energy, and they disrupt neurological sensory function. Already being used, now they're being developed with higher specificity. The idea of intracranial pulse stimulators take this one step further. Now the idea is to utilize direct electromagnetic pulses to be able to disrupt neural network aggregation. There have been some animal studies that have been done that look at the viability of electromagnetic pulses across various distances to essentially disrupt the network properties of the brain and create confusional models. So these are both individual and group disruptors. You also have the idea of the altered reality tactics that is primarily used in irregular warfare. And here, once again, when we understand the construct of the way neural networks operate, they operate by key controller and influencing nodes that interact with other neural networks within the brain electrochemically. If we can utilize transcranial mechanisms to be able to disrupt this, what we can do is we can create disrupted neural network aggregation and literally disrupt people's sense of time, space, and place. And there have been a number of experiments that have examined this, more in the medical context of looking at how we can try to control epilepsy, and we do recognize that these things are viable, although they have not yet been translated directly into operational use. But they have been entertained for certain forms of special operations in irregular warfare, and so they're on the palette of possibility, although not near-term probability. If we go one step further, I think it becomes important for us to also understand that we can utilize devices slightly differently. This is the idea of the sort of non-human cyborg. And I don't use that word in any way colloquially. I mean it literally. A cybernetic organism that is an integration between a biological system and a technological system. The pioneering work in this field was done years ago. It was Delgado's work with deep brain stimulation in a bull. He utilized deep brain stimulating electrode coupled to a remote device, got into the bull arena, induced the bull to charge, pressed the button, and arrested the bull's forward motion. Stopped, poised right before him. See what I can do through the use of cybernetic interactive systems. Remotely controlled brain systems, brain interface. Will key individuals get certain implants? Yes, I believe they will. Will key individuals also be able to get the benefits of translational neurosurgery that decrease some of the risks and burdens? Yes, they will. Will this be widely seen as a mechanism of individual and crowd control? No, it will not, at least not in the immediate future. But what has gone from the drawing board to the reality is this: the use of neural interfacing and physiological interfacing through the idea of remote-controlled small-scale systems to be able to modify the behavior of non-human animals on a variety of scales, small mammals, and increasingly the use of insects. The pioneering work was done by DARPA, something called the DARPA beetle or the DARPA fly. And more recently, an independent, non-DARPA-funded commercial enterprise, calls itself Dragonfly, has been able to utilize a combined set of techniques, both direct neural stimulation through the use of what we call macro technology and optogenetic control of key neuron firing patterns, to be able to direct the wing beats and pulses, and as a consequence, directionality of a dragonfly. And characteristically, an insect of about that big works quite well, because it can not only carry this particular payload, which is very, very light, and now does not have the burden of the prior DARPA beetle that needed a battery. This utilizes a solar rechargeable source, so it is infinitely powerful, but must also be able to bear the burden of now these very, very small scale, and in some cases, they're looking to the high level nano or at least low level micro scale use of various electrodes that can then both record and perhaps deliver certain types of payloads as well. So the idea of now going back to these very, very low dose, be a surveillance device that could be used for public health and also to monitor key environmental factors. And the same is being touted here, that this is not a device that is weaponizable. The reason I tell you about it is that this was a point of considerable debate and discourse at the recent meeting of the European Union Human Brain Project Subcommittee on Dual Use. And I stood before these people and said to them, this is not being entertained in these ways. And the response there was, yes, but it should. And so the fact that people are thinking about this, but this was not explicit intent, means that it is, in fact, capable to be developed in these directions. And that becomes a real concern and consideration. So when we're looking at this idea of neuroscience and technology for national security, intelligence, and defense, I think the take-home message here is that, yeah, we can access and affect, manipulating control, so to speak, neural systems to affect, alter, change, direct minds via brains, and therefore the hearts in which those minds are embodied. We used to talk, as I said, about hearts and minds. Now, through the use of neuroscience and technology, minds and hearts is a far more viable description because it describes for us explicitly the root of engagement. What we can do here, I think, is very provocative. What we should do, that's still, I think,